Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Nassiri, and each week I meet with military veterans. I learn about what they do in their career, how they got there, and advice for other veterans seeking to do the same. Today we're going to be breaking from the normal format of interviewing someone. We're going to be doing a skills episode talking about networking, coffee chats, email outreach. Those of you who have listened to more than one episode probably know the importance that everyone talks about of networking, how to get a hold of people, how to get advice, how to get that extra inside edge. It's something that I do right now all day long, so that's why I wanted to talk about it real quickly, because it's very, very top of mind for me. But first, if you are enjoying Beyond the Uniform, there are 3 different things you can do to help me out. First of all, there is a donate button on the site, and if you click on the top right of the beyondtheuniform.io, you can donate to support the show. I'm also lining up companies to sponsor episodes so that you can advertise about hiring veterans, about products that veterans may like. So if you know of a company that would be good to sponsor, would greatly appreciate your sending them my way. Or third thing is tell your friends, tell the bases nearby, commands, units, anyone that could benefit from the over 200 hours of content that we have now, 100% for free at beyondtheuniform.io. So let's dive into today's topic about email outreach. For those of you who listened to episode number 100, where I shared my story, you know that I've used email outreach for fundraising, raising over $3 million in venture capital, getting a hold of world-class experts, closing more than $500,000 in sales with Disney, Budweiser, Levi's. Email outreach is something that is very, very useful in a variety of contexts. It's a lot of what I do at the company that I joined just about 2 months ago called Shotzer. And on that note, just a quick side thing. This is the first time I've worked for someone else in the 10 years since I left the Navy. When I went to business school at Stanford and then started my own company, it's been a very long time since I've worked for someone else. And I have lots of thoughts on the differences between being CEO and being the number 3 person at a startup. And I'm going to share that at the very end because I think it's interesting for those of you thinking about entrepreneurship or joining a company. But I realize it's not as relevant as email outreach. So I'll kind of keep that to the end to be more efficient. But I did want to share a quick example about how I ended up joining this company. And that was I met with someone at a meetup here in Denver, and they said, oh, you should talk to my friend. I talked to their friend. We grabbed breakfast. We were just talking about startups in general, and she was kind enough to put me in touch with 3 different venture capitalists here in Denver. I met with actually, she put me in touch with an Air Force Academy grad. I met with him and grabbed coffee. He put me in touch with 3 different venture capitalists. I met with those 3 different venture capitalists, and they just told me about different portfolio companies I might want to get involved with or advise or, just look at. And one of the companies, I met with maybe 10. One of the companies, fast forward 15 meetings with them, was the one that I joined as their chief revenue officer, which is a mix of chief marketing officer and head of sales. But it was just interesting to me. I was just looking back on the email thread, thinking it was literally one meeting that led to another, that led to another, and led to another. And you've probably heard this in different interviews, but it was crazy for me to experience that, where the only reason I got this job or even knew about the opportunity was through referrals. And it turned out being a 5th or 6th degree referral. It's like the pebble that hits the pond and it ripples out, and it leads to something. But it was a strong reminder to me of how important it is to be, I don't think of it as networking, but I think that's what you'd call it, but meeting people and just constantly, meeting new people. And so to set the stage for why this may be relevant, for those of you who are looking for a job, I think that it's a powerful way to, exactly like I did, get in front of the right people, look through enough opportunities that you find the one that you're really excited about. For those of you who are in a company, it's a great way to find mentors, to find sales leads, to find partnership prospects. But I'm also just a big believer that you should be borrowing experience. Like the most efficient way to get ahead is to learn from others. And this is a great way to try to get a hold of people who can advise you about your career, about a specific functional role, about a specific industry, really learning and accelerating your growth through oftentimes people who have decades worth of experience in a particular area. The process I'll kind of take you through is just maybe a framework for you to think of. And again, with my work with Shotzer right now, I'm just constantly reaching out to people for advice, understanding the landscape, setting up partnerships, talking with people who are buying our software, all sorts of different things. But regardless of the intention, the process is pretty similar that I take. And so let me just I'll just lay out some steps. So what I would recommend as a starting point is coming up first with a list of, I'm betting for most of you it's companies that you might want to work at, but it could be, if you're trying to gain knowledge about marketing, maybe it's companies that are really well known for good marketing. Or if you're trying to better understand clean technology, what are the companies that are well respected there? And I use LinkedIn for this. You can search really easily. They have filters around industries, the size of companies. So if you're looking for a 201 to 500 person company versus an 11 to 50 person company, you can look in different geographies. So you can really fine tune your search based on whatever you're looking for. So I start with like a Google Doc or an Excel spreadsheet, and I just have a list of these companies. I then go back, and for each company, I look at the company. You can click through on LinkedIn to see the employees. And I'm looking for one of two things. First of all, I'm looking for second-degree connections. That means I know someone on LinkedIn who knows the person at that company. So I look for second-degree connections, or I look for either alumni from the Naval Academy, alumni from Stanford. In some cases, I'll look for alumni at McKinsey & Company where I did consulting work. But that's just kind of looking for a common thread. And what I try to do, if I'm disciplined and not getting ahead of myself, is I really want to look through, let's say I have a list of 20 or 30 companies. I really want to get a list of every possible second-degree connection that I have to all of these companies. And the reason I do that is that it's all about deconflicting. You really want to be respectful of your network. And so you don't want to be calling on the same person 10 times to make an introduction. And I've had that happen where I'll ask someone for an intro, and then I'll see the next day that I actually had a company I was more excited about talking to, and that same person is my only intro source to that company. And I kind of burnt my one ask, or you can maybe get away with 2 or 3 asks for an intro on something lesser valued. So now I try to be a little bit more disciplined and really getting the game plan in place first. So from these 20 or 30 companies, maybe now there's 50 or 60 different ways for me to get a hold of these people. And, if oftentimes you'll see you may have multiple intros into a company, but, I generally try to pick the person I like most. I just figure if I like them, the other person that they're introducing me to probably likes them. And it's not like this person's asking for an intro type of thing. The person you're asking for an intro can kind of reflect on you. That's at least my theory on it. And and so once I know I have my game plan, the next thing I do is I try to come up with a template. And after the laundry list of steps here, I'm going to share with you a couple templates just to give you a sense. Obviously, I'm not the only way to do this, but I've been doing so much of this. I'm just going to literally type in my email and read to you what I wrote for what it's worth. And just to try to give you my intention is to give you a sense of one possible way to get a hold of people. So what I like to do is come up with a template. If I'm reaching out to these companies, why do I want to talk to them? I recommend making it as forwardable as possible. What I mean by that is you're already asking someone a favor, like, hey, can you introduce me to Bob? You want to make it as easy as possible for them to say, yes, I can. Let me just forward this to them, or let me just reply to this and add them to the thread. And so I try to do all the heavy lifting. I want to do all the explanation of the reason why it's important for me to talk to them. One thing to bear in mind on this is that, for myself, and I joke with this about this with friends, I think I'm definitely not alone. I would say at least a third of my LinkedIn connections, and I have 2,000 or more, it's like I have no idea who they are or how I met them. And so just to kind of set expectations, if you were to email me and ask for an introduction, there's a very reasonable chance that I'm going to say, like, hey, I actually don't know that person. I don't know them well. And that's just another reason why you want to have multiple ways into a company, because it's a 30% chance that whoever you're asking would love to help you out. They just don't even know that person that well. And then the other thing, just on that piece of affordable email, I get intro requests all the time. Just to be respectful of my network, I will generally I'll forward the email to the person, and I'll say, hey, this is who's asking for the intro and how I know them. Would you be open to talking to them? And that's another thing. I mean, I have people that I barely know asking for an intro, and if it's someone that's I know well, I don't mind doing that, but oftentimes it's like, hey, like I interviewed the CEO of Pepsi. Would you introduce me to the CEO of Pepsi? It's like, no way. That's like such a high value, delicate relationship that I very rarely call on. I can't do that for someone I just don't know, or I can't do that at all because I don't, they did me such a big favor. I can't impose on them. So just kind of know that all of these things, it's just a numbers game. So don't take it personally if someone says they won't make the intro. Don't take it personally if the person doesn't respond. It's just part of the territory. So generally, stepping back, I'll come up with a template, kind of the reason why I want to talk to this sort of company. And then I always like to tailor a little bit about the email. For me, that's generally the first couple of sentences. And that's some sort of, that's personalized. It's not like, hey, John, could you please introduce me? It's just a little bit of etiquette that I like to do of whoever I'm emailing having something to say to them. So I'm not just asking them for a favor. And again, that's just my take, but you're listening to my podcast, so I'm assuming that you're interested in my perspective on this. The other piece, and I talk about this in the videos on the site about this topic, but at Beyond the Uniform, I use a plugin for Gmail called Boomerang. It's a great tool. It was 5 greats, I think. Boomerang, you can say, hey, remind me if this person doesn't respond. And I would say like 2 weeks. You can set different time thresholds. But I would say for Boomerang, hey, if the person doesn't respond in 2 weeks, let me know. It literally brings the email back to your inbox. So you can say like, hey, John, just circling back on this. Are you open to introduce me to Bob? And I like to do that because, for me, things just slip through the cracks. A lot of times people will email me and I have every intention of responding and I just forget. So I think 2 weeks is a respectable amount of time. And I think you can get away with that maybe once or maybe twice as a follow-up. So oftentimes I'll email someone for an intro. I'll use Boomerang to remind me in 2 weeks in case they forget. I'll send that reminder, hey, just checking back on this email I sent you 2 weeks ago. And then if it's someone I'm comfortable with, I'll set another reminder for another 3 or 4 weeks. And that way it's just kind of letting it play the full course. If they don't respond after that, I just let it go. There's too many people out there to rely on for intros. And try not to take it personally. I struggle with that, but it's just, you never know what's going on in people's lives. If they're not responsive, don't worry. It's just all a numbers game. The other piece on this that I just really like to highlight is, and actually I appreciate many of the listeners who have kind of emailed me for things or for intros. They actually do a great job at this, but it's just kind of following up with the person who made the intro. I just did this for a meeting we had with a very, very big company, and the person I had gotten the intro from, I just circled back. I'm like, hey, Derek, thank you so much again for making the introduction to so-and-so. The conversation went really well. We're meeting again in a week, and I just really appreciate it. And that goes a long way where, you're not just using these intros once. This is something that I think is going to be part of your life and career. So you want to go that extra step to thank the people who are helping you out. And I'm not suggesting a handwritten note or chocolates or anything. It's literally just a 2-sentence email to let them know that you appreciate it. And I know, for myself, it goes a long way. It kind of leaves a positive taste. Otherwise, it's just kind of like whatever happened there. It's just I highly recommend that. One other piece with this, and this is just maybe getting into the actual meeting. If you're meeting with someone, and whether that's in person, especially in person, but also by the phone, it's really important to have some notes. Every single meeting I have, and I have like no exaggeration, I have like probably between 5 and 10 of these types of meetings a day, like lots of them. Every single day, I'm prepping for those meetings, and I'm coming up with the questions I want to ask. I do my research on who the person is. I want to make sure that anything I'm asking, I couldn't find out within a few seconds of Googling. You want to make sure that you're getting deeper. It's just when I've had people that I get on the phone with, and they're like, "Oh, you run a podcast," and I'm like, "Oh man, that's like if you just Google my name or looked on LinkedIn, there's no way you wouldn't know that. And if you don't know that, like it's just a waste of my time. I'm not trying to be a diva. I'm just trying to give you an example of being honest. And I know I'm not alone on that. And I know that I've wasted people's time on the other side of things. So I really try to do my homework beforehand. And again, this is like 3 to 5 minutes. It's not anything extensive, but you want to show up. Maybe, you can refer to an article they wrote, you can refer to somewhere they worked. Just give them that sense that you value their time enough to have done a little bit of homework. But the thing with the notes, it's not about just the preparation of knowing the game plan of the questions you're going to ask. I use Evernote. I've used Evernote for over 5 years. It's a great app. I literally have notes from calls 5 years ago that I'll reference. There are people at this point where I'm talking to for a second or third time, and I always review and like, what did we talk about last time? So it's just really nice to have a sense of what they said. Why I think this is so crucial for when you're meeting in person is and again, this is just my personal take, but I really don't think I'm alone on this. If someone has an in-person meeting with me and the purpose is to ask advice on something, and they don't have an iPad or a phone or a pen and paper, something to write things down, it's like minus 30 points. It's like automatically dropping 3-letter grades. Because, I like to, let's just take me personally. If someone's asking me about something, let's just say they're asking someone about startup related. I can probably rattle off, if it's related to social media and what I've done for the last 10 years, I can probably rattle off the name of 20 different companies, 30 different books, 50 different podcasts. I'm not trying to boast. It's if you do anything for 10 years, you have a lot of experience. So if I'm rattling these things off, there's just no way that someone remembers it. And when I don't see someone writing it down, I just start phoning in the meeting. It's like, look, I'm going to give you my B content because like you don't really value this. And I've talked with others. I hear very similar things. Even if you never look at the notes again, honestly, it's like an ego stroke. If someone's like writing down what you're saying, you're like, oh, I feel special. And they're doing you a favor. Give them at least that. Let them feel special. But obviously, if you're meeting with them, there's something you want to learn. And you want to be able to capture this down. And same thing, I'll always block off time after a meeting to kind of summarize the key takeaways, any next steps. And I'll even do little highlights, just like the top 3 takeaways. That's something I learned at McKinsey after interviewing people. Is I would take, I'd have pages of notes, and then I'd take the most salient points from the conversation. So that way, when I'm reviewing them later on, I don't have to just pour through this whole document. I guess one other thing is, I talked about following up with the person who introduced you. I'm not great at this, so I'm kind of giving this note to myself as well. It's always good to follow up with whoever met with you, and don't make it generic. It's just short and sweet, but like, thanks so much for meeting. I really appreciate what you said about, Bunker Labs, and as a great resource, I'm going to check them out and have a great week. It's just kind of like a nice way to kind of close the loop. And if you want to connect with them on LinkedIn, sure, again, this person may not remember you a year from now, so limited value to that, but it's something I generally do. It's not much downside there. So let me, and I apologize I didn't queue this up in advance, but I literally just sent a bunch of emails for intros, and let me just pull one of them up. I'm going to try and actually give you two different examples. So what I did, I've got like 8 different inboxes. That's another problem. Okay, so this is an email that I sent to a former colleague of mine, and someone I know pretty well. So I said, Jake, are you going to be around on Sunday, May 27th? I'm flying into San Francisco to speak on a panel. Quick side note, service to school, if anyone's there, look me up, that afternoon. And if you're free, I'd love to grab breakfast or brunch and catch up. Next paragraph, I saw that you're connected to Brian Bouquet. Actually, let me leave this a little bit more anonymous. I see that you're connected to Brian at company name. Do you know him well enough to make an intro? If so, feel free to use this email to make the connection. I'm hoping to meet with Brian about a potential partnership between this company and Schatzer. I saw that he heads up this person's title, and he also used to oversee their online experience. I think that we could provide less expensive and more engaging photos of their destinations and properties. For example, we're working with Wyndham Hotels to provide photos of all their locations and events, which they use in their digital marketing. Given Brian's 8 years in travel and hospitality, I'm also hoping to ask him a few questions about the space. Thanks, and hope to hang soon, Justin. So again, not perfect. Subject line on this was just intro to Brian so-and-so at the company name. It's not super personal, but it's personal enough. It's giving Brian, in case Jake forwards this, it's giving Brian some context of why I want to meet with him. There's a decent chance that he just says, like, this isn't relevant and doesn't take the meeting. But trying to make this as affordable as possible and trying to make it as succinct as possible. I get a lot of emails that are like speeches. It's like the Gettysburg Address. And you're like, it's not that important, you know? That's one example. Let me just see if I have one more. Okay. So this was someone that I went to grad school with. They were a year behind me. I graduated in 2009, so this is almost 9 years ago. That is one of the reasons why people go to college or grad school, is to have that network of people that you know. So this one, I said GSB, stand for GSB 09 intro request. And I said, Brian, it's been a long while, but I hope that you're doing well. I saw that you're connected to so-and-so on LinkedIn. Would you be open to making an intro to either of them? I recently joined a company, Schatzer, that provides authentic photos at scale in a way that is cheaper and more aligned with companies consume and use visual content. We've started to partner with nationwide realtors to provide neighborhood and local photos for digital marketing. Given this company's focus on social media for realtors, I wanted to explore a partnership. Thanks, Justin. So take it for what it's worth, just 2 different examples. I did want to just make it a little bit more concrete about how I do this, and I think I've had good results with it. Obviously, room to learn, obviously lots of different ways to do this, but wanted to leave you with something a little bit more tangible to not make this too abstract for you. A couple other things. So this is all about intros. I am behind on the video series I started on beyondtheuniform.io, but there's a initial video that's talking more about cold outreach. The best way, in my opinion, is to get an introduction. That's greatly increases the chances that you actually get the person to respond. But if you don't have an intro source and you really want to get a hold of someone, cold outreach is great. I've done that for many of the interviews I've done for Beyond the Uniform, closed many sales deals through that. It's a very powerful tool. In the videos, I talk about things like a tool called Email Hunter to help you figure out the person's email, all sorts of different tools to use and tricks. So if this information has been helpful, definitely look at the video. I'm actually, ashamedly, I'm kind of looking at the video count on YouTube. And once it gets high enough, I'll realize people are actually enjoying the videos and I'll do more. But it's just been a little bit low on my to-do list. And I'm not really sure if that's what people need from Beyond the Uniform, and so that's one of the reasons why there's not a ton of video content there. So that's all on the email outreach piece. I was going to circle back to where I started with just kind of a quick reflection on having joined this company, Schatzer, and some lessons learned. If that is not relevant to you, feel free to hop off. It looks like we're at about 24 minutes here, so maybe you got a little bit more time in your commute, but I'll try and keep this to 5 minutes or less. So, as many of you may know, I served on submarines 5 years, got out, went to business school at Stanford, started a company called Storybox, raised about $3 million in capital, worked with over 35 Fortune 500 companies, ran that company for over 8 years, and reached a point where I really wanted to do something different, wanted to have someone else run Storybox, and for me, it was actually really interesting because I do so many of these interviews, and I have a huge desire to help out people on active duty figure out what they want to do for a living. And so it was interesting for me for the first time in 8 years to be back in the position of trying to figure out what I want to do. And that's probably a whole nother episode, but and let me know if that would be interesting, and I'll do an episode on that. But long story short, I realized that what I most wanted after 8 years of running my own company was learning and growth. Those were the values that I was striving for. And there was another opportunity that was incredible, absolutely incredible, to be CEO of a company with an incredible tech team, incredible product, great venture capitalist backing, and just be in the CEO position again. And I turned it down because I realized, like, if that went well, if that startup succeeded, great. But if it didn't, I wouldn't really have any insight into what I'm doing wrong. Storybox has been great. It wasn't a home run like I wanted it to be. And so there's a lot of questions I have as an entrepreneur of what I need to do differently. And what I realized with joining Schatzer is it would give me the most data. It would give me the most information about so many different things. About, do I like not being CEO? Am I better in a support role than in the leading role? What's it like to be working around a team instead of a lot of the work I do with Storybox is remote, location agnostic. It would give me information about the industry and vertical and functional role, all these different things which would be new data that I never had before with Storybox. And I hope, gives me more insight into what I want to do next. But to kind of get back to the central point, there's been a couple trends that have been really interesting to me because I really, really like my role at this company. I like the people I'm working with, and I really appreciate the change in pace. But these are a few anecdotes for what has been different for me being an employee versus being the founder and CEO. The first one is, this is probably pretty obvious, but it's so much easier for me to shut off at the end of the day. With Storybox, it was 8 years of 24/7. Not that I was working 24/7, but it weighed on my mind. I don't have kids yet. It weighed on my mind in a way that I imagine kids weigh on your mind, where you're always worried about their safety. And so always worried about, I joke with Rebecca because she said, for the 5 years she's known me, I've always been worried about Storybox going out of business, and it never did. But yet it was always a constant concern. And I think that might be, maybe I'll be a very paranoid parent, always worrying that my kid is going to be in danger. But I don't feel that with Schatzer. I feel very invested. But I also appreciate that when work is over, I go home, and for the most part, I don't work. And I really enjoy that. And not only not working, but I'm not worried about everything. I'm not worried about the sky falling and me being the sole person, keeping my team safe and keeping things going. So that's one thing. Another thing is I'm really appreciating being able to focus on one thing, which is, marketing and sales. That's obviously a very big bucket, but it's not everything. And so a story with that is when I first joined, one of the guys I work for, two of the younger team members were chatting with each other about some project. And the CEO did what I always did. His ears perked up like a little dog, and he leans in and he gives his 2 cents on what they're talking about. And I noticed in that moment, it felt so refreshing to not have to be the one weighing in, to not having to make it my business to listen to every conversation. I think for me, it was out of a fear that something would go wrong or something wouldn't be as good as it needed to be. And I think that's good for the CEO. I think that's something that they should be doing. But it was so nice for me to just put on my headphones and stay focused on a project rather than being tugged in so many different ways. A third one is, and this may just be more about my personality, but for almost, I would say for the entire time I was running Storybox, I had such a bias towards execution, which is great in many senses. But honestly, there were so many times one of my team members would come up to me to ask a question, and I'm listening to them, but there's this track in the back of my mind where it's like, I got to get back to work. I got to get back to this email. I got to get back to this. I got to get back to doing. I got to get back to executing. And so not only was I not fully present for that conversation, but it's like the music at the Oscars. It's like the wrap it up. That music was constantly sounding in my head, like, okay, wrap it up. And at Schatzer with Mark and Frank, the two co-founders, there have been, in 2 months, there has been at least 6 times where we went into a conference room, just kind of like, hey, let's just circle up. And we stayed there for over 2 hours, oftentimes 3, just talking. We start with something, we all have different perspectives, we talk. And I never gave myself permission to do that with Storybox. And, it's like, I don't know why, but it's easier to give myself permission to do that, to like kind of put my tasks on hold. And out of almost every single one of those 6 meetings, not only does some new idea or new strategy come to light, but it is like absolutely game changing. Like it is a conversation that I'm betting saved us, probably no exaggeration, months of heading in the wrong direction. And so I really like that. And I think there's something for me about not being in charge where I give myself more permission to do that because I'm less worried about everything you have to do as CEO, the finances, investor relationships, customer retention. For me at least, I was worried about everything constantly. And that was very difficult to dial down in any setting. And I think that leads into the kind of maybe last thing I'll say is I really respect the 2 people I'm working for. One is actually a Naval Academy grad, maybe 10 to 14 years ahead of me, but they had experience working together for over 10 years. They ran a company with $350 million in revenue and 2,600 employees. That has not been my path, and I really appreciate learning from them. And that's something, honestly, I haven't had for 8 years. I've had advisors, I've had investors, I've had board members, I've had employees, I've had experts that I'm constantly reaching out to. But the difficult thing there is you're just getting snippets of people's time. You're just getting little tiny bursts, and then you're kind of in the wilderness on your own. And when you have employees, like you get feedback, but it's always, people, I think, pull punches. They can't really be as direct with you as you need and all these other things. So having 2 people to learn from is something I'm noticing now is like this hunger, like the hunger that I didn't realize I knew I had for 8 years of just seeing everything different. I really appreciate seeing their pitch deck for fundraising, their budget, their financials, and to be learning again is awesome. And I bring that up too because I got out of the military in 2007, which is a long time ago. That's 11 years ago. And I admire some of the attitude I had in wanting to forge my own way in entrepreneurship, but I think there's also something to be said for learning from the best, from learning from really good people, or for being around really good people. And while I don't regret the path I had with entrepreneurship, and I hope to return to starting my own company and running my own company one day, it's very nice to feel like I'm actually sharpening concrete skill sets. And especially given that I came from the military and had business school and some internships, but I never got to see how anyone else did it. I'm celebrating that I don't have to reinvent the wheel on everything, that I can actually see how they lead. An example, I really admire they give the team a lot of autonomy. We have a guy on the team who's awesome, super bright, 23 years old, and both of the co-founders give him so much room. Like they're just like, yeah, go do it. Like they trust that he's smart and capable and will figure it out. And again, in contrast, I realize how tightly I held Storybox and how I never really gave people full rope to be able to just run and explore. And yes, that leads to failure, but it also leads to like incredible things that I would have never thought of. And so realizing in many ways how I kind of limited the creativity of the company by insisting on being more involved than I needed to be. And that's just one particular example. I'm sure there'll be many more, but it's just nice learning and contrast. And yeah, and I would also say, having started Storybox as a solo founder, generally the two founders and I are in the room together having discussions, but it's like going back to that long discussion point, that the conclusions we're coming to, there is no way on earth that I would ever come to them on my own. And it's not a straight path. It's this meandering conversation where we're arguing and presenting different viewpoints and pushing back and feeling comfortable with each other enough to voice dissenting opinions. And it leads to something so far ahead of what I would come up on my own. And I think I really like independent ops. I like doing things independently, and I love Beyond the Uniform and Storybox for that. But I see the value of having different perspectives. So I hope this was helpful. It was therapeutic for me to figure this out and share that with you. It's something I'll probably post on an article on LinkedIn about pretty soon. But was just kind of free-forming some thoughts on that and hope that was beneficial for you. We'll be back to the normal format soon. I'm trying a couple other different takes on episodes. Greatly appreciate feedback at the website, justin@beyondtheuniform.io, LinkedIn message, whatever works for you. But would love to know if these sorts of interview or episodes are helpful. I default to the interview format, and I'll continue to do that. But if these things are really valuable, let me know. And again, I would greatly appreciate your sharing the word with other vets who would benefit from this program. Thanks. Have a great day.